at one key spot on the defensive side of the ball for the New York Jets, it's the best of times, and it's also the worst of times. I'll explain what I mean today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, March 25th, 2025, 9 months until Christmas, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listener, first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. On today's show, we're going to take stock of what the Jets have on the defensive side of the ball. We're going to go position by position. It's a good time to do it because we're a couple of weeks into free agency, so the big part of free agency is over. But there still are some players to be signed, and the NFL draft is in just a couple of weeks, so Jets have made some moves. There are still some moves to come. There are still some holes to fill. Let's go position by position and see where the Jets need help. And on yesterday's show, we did this with the offense. We're going to use the same grading mechanism we used yesterday, which is a green flag, a yellow flag, or a red flag. A green flag means Jets are in great shape at that position. No real additions needed. Jets are going to be very good as long as everybody stays healthy. A red flag means they're in real trouble unless they make some significant additions. And a yellow flag somewhere in between. It's a spot where the Jets are not terrible, where things could work out, but there are enough question marks to be concerned. There are enough wild cards there that you can't feel completely confident in the spot. And let's begin with the defensive end position. And I'm going to say that that's a yellow flag. And it might seem odd to say that because in the last 3 years, the Jets have picked 2 players in the first round at the defensive end position. And both of them are pretty successful players, or at least I could say both of them are off to successful starts in their respective careers. You have Jermaine Johnson, who, of course, is coming off an injury, but was a Pro Bowler in his second season. And you also have Will McDonald, who was drafted a year later, who just posted a double-digit sack season. But despite the fact these guys are good players, there's not a lot behind them. And I think both McDonald and Johnson have their own question marks. Johnson, of course, is coming off a very serious injury. So he's got to prove he's healthy. He's got to prove he can bounce back from that injury he suffered. And for McDonald, there are a couple of things. The first thing, and I don't mean to be critical of Will McDonald, because I do think he's part of the solution for the New York Jets going forward. But I think one thing that you'd have to note is a lot of his sacks came last year on plays where he wasn't blocked. And I think he's a good pass rusher. I don't think he's going to be a double-digit guy consistently. I think he's going to be more like a 7 to 8 sack a year guy, which is pretty valuable. The other issue with McDonald is the player he currently is, at least, has issues against the run. In fact, he's a liability against the run. Now, the question is, what's Aaron Glenn going to do with him? Because a year ago, Robert Saleh was talking about McDonald adding maybe 15 pounds of bulk. And you put 15, 20 pounds of muscle on McDonald, it seemed to me like he had the frame that he could do it. But if you had like 15 to 20 pounds of muscle, he's going to be stronger. He'll probably hold up better against the run. I don't think he'll lose a lot of his athleticism. And he may be able to bull rush a little better because he doesn't really have a bull rush right now. He's more just a speed rush, spin move guy, which is, again, is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I do think there are questions about McDonald, how well he holds up against the run. That said, I mean, look, I like both players. I think the real issues, and then maybe it's just nitpicking with those two, the real issues are what do the Jets have behind them at the defensive end spot? And I think in today's NFL, I mean, you want at least 3 quality guys, and the Jets don't have that third quality guy. Last year, that third quality guy was supposed to be Hassan Reddick. In fact, he was supposed to be the top pass rusher on the team, and we all know how that went. But, I mean, you have Michael Clemens, who is still on the roster right now. I mean, I know we're not getting much out of him. The questions: can Eric Watts or Braden McGregor maybe fill a role? Both guys were undrafted rookies last year. Or do the Jets maybe go outside the organization to find somebody? I do think that there are questions at the defensive end spot. I think that both McDonald and Johnson have some degree of questions. The bigger issue, though, is depth, because you lose either McDonald or Johnson, then you're in some real trouble at the defensive end spot. And in many ways, you could say something similar about the defensive tackle spot. Now, not entirely, because Quinnen Williams is a better defensive tackle than Will McDonald or Jermaine Johnson are defensive ends. And Quinnen Williams, when he's on, can pretty much carry the position on his own. I mean, we've seen guys like Sheldon Rankins and guys like Quinton Jefferson go out and have really good seasons next to Quinnen Williams, because Williams just demands so much attention. And even when he gets double teamed, he's a force. Even when gets double teamed, he can use his technique to split it. He can get off blocks. He can make plays. He's a guy who always has a plan. And if his first move doesn't work, he's got a second move he can go to. Now, 2024 was not a vintage Quinnen Williams season. There were stretches where it was a vintage Quinnen Williams season, but not entirely. But I'm inclined to give Quinnen a pass just from the standpoint that there were lots of guys who struggled on last year's Jets team. Last year's Jets team was in a very difficult situation because of everything that happened through the year, because of just the levels of organizational chaos that existed, and the issues where the coaching staff was short-staffed because of the owner's impulses, the owner's impulsive decision to fire Robert Saleh 5 games into the season. So I'm inclined to give Quinnen a pass. The issue is behind Quinnen, where the Jets they just don't really have a lot. And they signed Jay Tufeel from the Cincinnati Bengals. They signed Derek Nandi from the Kansas City Chiefs. But if we're going to be honest, neither of those guys is likely to be particularly helpful, or at least, if they have good seasons, it's probably because Quinnen Williams again is making them look better, because he's drawing so much attention away from these guys. Now, if you got Quinnen Williams in the mix, your defensive tackle spot's going to be fine, because ultimately, he's enough of a force as both a pass rusher and as a run stopper that you're not going to have any issues. You'll be just fine there. The real issue is that the Jets are depending a lot on Quinnen Williams, at least as the roster is currently constructed, because if Quinnen Williams goes down, you are suddenly looking at perhaps the worst group of defensive tackles in the league. And look, every team, if they have a star like Quinnen Williams, he gets injured, you've got problems. That's not exclusive to the Jets. It's just this Jets team is really, really not equipped to handle an injury to Quinnen Williams. It's not even like you can go out there and hope you stabilize the position. There's spots where you have a superstar, and if he goes down, you're obviously in big trouble, but you at least have somebody who can provide quality play. I don't think the Jets have anybody else who can provide quality play at the defensive tackle position as they're currently constructed. So that's why I have to go with a yellow flag at the defensive tackle spot. And of course, there's a guy out there, a guy I've been talking about a lot, Mason Graham, who was probably going to go high in the first round of the draft out of Michigan, a defensive tackle prospect who's kind of a blue chip prospect. If they just got Mason Graham on this roster, this would immediately go to a green flag situation, because then up the middle, you'd have your defense built around two absolutely phenomenal talents at the defensive tackle spot. And you don't see that a lot in the NFL. You don't see a lot of teams have double trouble at the defensive tackle spot, where and when you have two good defensive tackles, it changes everything, because it gives you the opportunity to always have a talented guy go one-on-one. There's only 5 offensive linemen versus 4 defensive linemen. So 5-on-4 means one guy can be double teamed, but you can't double team 2. And usually Quinnen Williams draws the double teams. Quinnen Williams' double team rate is over 60%. It's been over 60% consistently, and there's a reason for that. The offenses are directing their blocking schemes at him. If you add like a Mason Graham to the mix, you're going to pay for that, because you suddenly would have a talented young guy. But at this point, you can't really say that anybody would pay for double teaming Quinnen Williams, because Jets just don't really have a lot of talent behind him at the defensive tackle spot. And we've talked a lot about this. I think that the focus of the defense, the resources are going to change from being focused on the defensive line under Robert Saleh, who liked to rush 4, which required great defensive linemen. It's going to focus more on the secondary under Aaron Glenn, because Glenn likes to blitz more, which means you have more pass rushers, but means you have got more stress on the secondary, so you need better guys back there. But ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, there are a couple of positions where I think the Jets are really solid, and one of them is in that secondary. Where did the Jets have green flags right now? Two spots. One of them's critical. The other's not so critical, but could play a big role in the Aaron Glenn defense, and we'll talk about what they are as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Because right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. You can always have your eye on a few underdogs, and FanDuel makes it easy to pick them with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something to bet on, and the FanDuel app is simple to use. When you win, you get paid instantly, no waiting around. Exciting weekend coming up in March Madness, the Sweet 16, the Elite 8. FanDuel's the place to get in on the action, so visit FanDuel.com to get in on that college hoops action all tournament long. Again, it's FanDuel.com. for NCAA tournament action. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. And a big shout out to you, everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Continuing our look at the defensive side of the ball, going position by position and judging where the New York Jets are right now. And we're using kind of a system with green flag if it's good to go, yellow flag if it could be okay, but there are question marks, and red flags for positions where the Jets have some real issues. And let's move on to the linebacker position. And I got to say, this one's a green flag for me. And it's really funny how things can change, because I remember 2 years ago, entering the season, I thought the linebacker position was a really shaky one for the Jets. And it ended up being a real strength for the team because, CJ Mosley had a big year 2 years ago, and then Quinnen Williams had his breakout season. And really, since then, linebacker has not been an issue for this team. And that continued last year, even with Mosley getting injured and missing most of the season, because Jamie Sherwood stepped into a starting role and played well and ended up winning the team MVP. Now, team MVP for the 2024 New York Jets is perhaps a bit of a low bar. And it's not to say, Jamie Sherwood is suddenly Ray Lewis or Brian Urlacher or insert the name of whatever great linebacker you want to say. But what I would say is Jamie Sherwood is a 25-year-old who's an ascending player who has proven himself to be a quality linebacker. And Quinnen Williams has shown himself to be a quality, first team All-Pro 2 years ago. So maybe better than a quality sideline to sideline guy, but the guy who brings a lot of speed to the table and a guy who's really impressed. And, both of these guys have kind of come from very humble beginnings, because Quinnen Williams was cut by the Jacksonville Jaguars at a point where the Jaguars were one of the worst teams in the NFL, and the Jets got him off waivers. You actually kind of wonder, because he's Quinnen Williams' brother. You wonder, how much Quinnen Williams being his brother had to do with that. But Quinnen Williams, ended up stealing a starting role in 2021 when he was acquired, and then just kept improving, and got to the point where he was a decent starter, and then turned into a first team All-Pro in 2023. And then Jamie Sherwood was a late round pick in 2021, and didn't really have that big of a role. His first year, he suffered an injury and a horrible loss the Jets had to New England. Then kind of developed into a quality part-time player, and then was able to step into a good starting role as a quality starter in 2024. And the Jets had some issues in 2024 against the run, but I really don't think it was the linebackers who were the problems. I think it was, for more than anything, I think it was the defensive line where, Will McDonald really struggled at setting the edge. Then you had just a disastrous defensive tackle spot after Quinnen Williams, where Javon Kinlaw could not play the run at all. Javon Kinlaw was just constantly getting moved off the ball in the run game. And Kinlaw was actually an okay pass rusher, but he was really a huge liability, which you can't have at the defensive tackle spot. And then you had guys like Lecky Fatu and Solomon Thomas, who really, you had guys who just can't play the run. When the defensive tackles held up fine, Jamie Sherwood was good, and Quinnen Williams was good. Now, I do think there are a few questions. How good are these guys in coverage? But I don't think they're disasters in coverage. So that's what I would say. Sherwood played as a converted safety. Typically, safeties are better than linebackers in coverage. So you move a guy from safety to linebacker, and generally he's going to be okay in coverage. And Quinnen Williams is fast. So Quinnen Williams can hold up with the fastest tight ends in the league. I'm not sure how great his ball skills are, but I still feel really good about this linebacking core for the New York Jets. And these guys are going to blitz a lot, because if you look at the defense Aaron Glenn ran in Detroit, lots of blitzing, one of the highest, I think the highest blitz rate in the league in 2024. But it tended to be from the linebacker spot. It tended to be from the second level of the defense, not the third level. There were a handful of safety blitzes Glenn threw out there, but these guys are going to add more to their plate next season, and they may be able to chip in a few sacks if things go well. Now let's move to the corner position, and at cornerback, I'd say green flag. This is another spot where I feel very confident what the Jets have now. Maybe not as confident as what they had a year ago, where they had that tremendous 1-2-3 punch of Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed, and Michael Carter II. Two of those guys are coming off relatively disappointing seasons, and one of them's gone. DJ Reed signed with the Detroit Lions, Aaron Glenn's old team. Sauce Gardner had a season that was down for Sauce Gardner. He was first team All-Pro his first 2 seasons in the league and was not as effective this past year. Now, a lot of Sauce's issues came from tackling, and look, even when Sauce Gardner was a first team All-Pro, he wasn't a first team All-Pro because his tackling was good. He always kind of struggled as a tackler, and some teams kind of exploited it. He also did not have a Sauce Gardner caliber season in coverage. And that's the key thing. Look, it's a nice thing if your corners can tackle, but you get your corners to cover one-on-one. And Sauce Gardner got off to kind of a slow start. Then I thought things kind of picked up for him through the season. It was quiet and he was still having issues tackling, so nobody really noticed it. But as we got closer to the end of the season, I thought Sauce Gardner looked much more like Sauce Gardner in coverage. And Michael Carter II, it felt like after he got his big contract last year, he kind of was like battling through injuries and did not have a typical Michael Carter II season. The question mark in this group is Brandon Stephens, who the Jets signed from Baltimore. A guy who's very big, a guy who, in theory, has the tools to become a very effective press coverage corner. And Aaron Glenn's going to play a lot of man, so will you see a lot of Brandon Stephens playing press man coverage, utilizing his size? You would think. And a signing like this brings questions. It brings a question of because Stephens was very up and down in Baltimore. Sometimes you see a guy on another team, and maybe there's just some technique thing you can fix, or you can put him in a better situation than he's been in. And you run a system that's better attuned to his skill set. And this is going to be one of those early tests for Aaron Glenn and Darren Mucci. How well can they scout guys on other teams? How effective is the Jets pro scouting department, where they see a guy on another team and they think they can make something better of him, that he's a better fit for their system than he is for the system that he came from. And Stephens' career was up and down in Baltimore, and I think it's fair to say that based on his play to date, he probably is not worth the money the Jets paid him. I don't think that that's a terribly controversial or unfair statement. But the question when you sign a free agent is not always is what he did in the past worth the money we're paying him. The question is, will what he's going to do in the future be worth the money we're paying him? And I think this is, for the Jets, this is kind of, I guess, in a way, an investment where they think that they can get more out of him than Baltimore. It's a dangerous thing to think you're going to get more out of a player than the Baltimore Ravens do. But, I can see the fit. Like, I could see like a scenario where this works out. I mean, I don't think I would have given Stephens the money the Jets gave him, but I can at least kind of see why they did, because if it works out, it can be a good contract. And, when the Jets signed, so for example, in a different position, was John Simpson worth the money the Jets paid him a year ago? Well, if you were judging him on what he did in the past, not really. He hadn't really played well enough to justify the contract he got from the Jets, but he played well enough. The Jets saw something in him. They saw an ascending player who, fit what they wanted to do well. And he ended up being worth the money because, while John Simpson's career in Baltimore may not have been worth the money the Jets paid him, they saw that, fitting him into this Jets team, he would be worth the money. So that's a guy who came from Baltimore, which, I have a lot of respect for the Baltimore Ravens. And, I think a lot of teams have gone bust. They tried to make moves to show that they're smarter than Baltimore. But that's an example of a guy who came from Baltimore and was better with the Jets. So I think the Jets are kind of hope for the same sort of outcome with Brandon Stephens. And, will they get it? It's difficult to say. But, even with Stephens being a question mark, even he got a number one like Sauce Gardner, it's tough not to feel good about where you are. I would expect Sauce Gardner is going to get a lucrative extension this offseason. He certainly deserves it. This is the first offseason where he's eligible. You can only get a long-term extension in the NFL after your third year in the league. Sauce Gardner has been in the league now 3 years, and he's been first-team All-Pro for 2 of them. And again, Michael Carter II, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that some of his struggles last year were due to injury, but he was one of the better slot corners in the league heading into last season, where he had a down year. And again, there were lots of guys on the Jets who had down years. So if we're ruling out everybody who had a down year for the 2024 Jets, we got to rule out a lot more guys than Michael Carter II, and we got to rule out a lot more guys than Sauce Gardner. So I feel very good about the Jets corner position. By the way, that's important because, as we know, Aaron Glenn is going to leave these guys on an island a lot more than Robert Saleh did. You're going to see a lot more one-on-ones with these guys back of the defense, a lot more man-to-man coverage, and I think that they can certainly hold up. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the last line of defense. It's a position where if you're not solid, you can really get yourself into trouble. I think it's fair to say at safety, Jets are not solid right now, but there actually is some hope. And that might seem like a contradiction, but it's really not. And I'll explain how as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We are going position by position through the defensive side of the ball, figure out where the Jets are good, where they need some help. Let's turn our attention now to the back of the defense and safety position. And I have to say, I feel like this is a red flag position right now for the New York Jets. Why do I say that? Well, they only have 3 safeties on the roster right now, and only one of them has NFL experience, and that's Andre Cisco, the guy they signed from Jacksonville. And if you're a regular listener to the show, if you're an everydayer, you know that I'm actually very positive on this signing because I think Cisco is a good fit on defense. You know, he's if you run a defense where you're blitzing a lot, that means you're playing a lot of man-to-man coverage. If you're playing a lot of man-to-man coverage, that usually means you're playing a lot of single high safety. There's one guy at the back of the defense, and Cisco's shown himself to be an adept safety. He's a guy with had a down 2024 that led to his benching in Jacksonville. But like I said with the Jets, when you were playing with the Jacksonville Jaguars in 2024, there were lots of guys who had down seasons, and I think sometimes you're just in a situation that's so chaotic that it just drags your play down. I think Jets had a lot of guys like that themselves. Andre Cisco has been a good, but prior to 2024, the preceding 2 seasons, Cisco had 7 combined interceptions, showed a lot of instincts from that deep middle spot. I'm a buyer on Andre Cisco as a bounce back candidate. The issue is that you don't have anything else at safety right now. I mean, you have 2 guys who are, two guys with minimal NFL experience, Jarius Monroe and Jalen Simpson. And those are the only safeties on the roster right now for the New York Jets. Now, the Jets have made a move with Tony Adams. Tony Adams was a restricted free agent. The Jets have offered him a 1-year contract. It gives Adams the opportunity to speak with other teams and to sign an offer sheet with another team. But if Adams signs with another team, the Jets have the right to match that offer. And most likely what will happen is Adams will just come back to the Jets on a 1-year contract because that's how it works as a restricted free agent. Your original team has the opportunity to offer you a 1-year contract. You can take the 1-year contract or you can sign with a different team. But if you sign with a different team, your original team gets a chance to match the offer. I don't think anybody's going to make a big offer to Tony Adams. So you could bring Tony Adams back. If that's the case, I don't think the safety position is in great shape because I don't think Tony Adams has proven himself to be a great player. But I might move it to a yellow flag once Tony Adams resigns because I don't think Tony Adams was that good last year. And I don't think the Jets safety play was that good. And I was very disappointed in the performance Chuck Clark gave the team because I thought Chuck Clark was going to be really good and he really wasn't. But I don't think safety play was what dragged the Jets down. I think there were moments where the safety play was bad. I think there were individual plays where, Jets allowed a big play because somebody at the safety position messed up. But you look at the failures of the 2024 Jets, I can't really go to the safeties to explain it. I thought they were solid enough. And I feel like there's enough upside with Andre Cisco in the mix that you'll be okay. But we're judging where things are right now. And right now the Jets only have 3 guys on the roster. And, bringing back Tony Adams is not going to make the safety play great. But as we know, in the NFL, it's very rare when a safety makes a huge difference, positive or negative. Safety is kind of like a low value position. And that's not to say, you'd rather have bad players than good players at safety. You'd obviously rather have good players than bad players. And a great safety can change the trajectory of your defense. It's just there aren't that many great safeties. There aren't that many guys in the league who move the needle at the safety position. And safety is always, we say this every year, and it always ends up being true. You get to May or June, and there's always some quality safety who's still available who you can get for a pretty cheap price. So all this is to say is that I think safety is a red flag right now for the Jets, but it's a red flag from the standpoint the position's not particularly strong. It's not a red flag from the standpoint that it's likely to sink the Jets at this moment because it's just it's kind of like it's just a low impact position. It's not a spot that really makes or breaks your defense typically, unless you have somebody who's really good or really bad. And right now the Jets don't have anybody in either category. It might be odd to hear me say it's a red flag spot because, again, I've been very positive on the Andre Cisco signing. I think he's a really good fit. I think he's a good bounce back candidate. I think the Jets got him on a pretty reasonable contract, just a 1-year, $10 million contract. The real questions go beyond that because there's not much there, and there's obviously very, very little in the way of depth right now for the New York Jets. So that's the spot where I think they've got some question marks. So if you go through it, I think at both defensive line spots, defensive end and defensive tackle, it's a yellow flag. Yeah, it's either really good or really bad there. You either have a first-round pick who plays at a really high level, or you have guys who are, not great players who you don't want to see a lot of snaps. At linebacker and corner, that's green. I mean, look, the Jets have really good shape. The Jets have good players across the board at those two spots. I feel really good about that, especially in corners, the more important of the two, because this defense is going to be based on man coverage, and these corners are going to have to hold up one-on-one. This defense doesn't work if you don't have corners who can hold up one-on-one, man-to-man, and the Jets should have corners who can do that. Then the safety spot, well, we got some work to do, and that doesn't mean you use a first-round pick, because there are very few safeties who are worth using a first-round pick on. It doesn't mean you have to invest a ton in it, but the Jets have some work to do because there are question marks and there are things that need to be filled beyond what they have right now. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody, and send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow we will plan on doing our weekly mailbag. Can't wait to answer your questions. Talk to you then.